Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, March 16th, 2021 meeting of the Dover Area School Board. If you would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mrs. Allman, could we have the roll call, please?
Mrs. Britton. Here. Mr. Cook.
Here.
Mr. Deschaux.
Here.
Mr. DeLauder.
Here.
Mr. Eifert.
Here.
Mr. Emig.
Here.
Mrs. Herman.
Here.
Mrs. Maley. Here. Mr. Rawhauser.
Here. 9
present.
Okay, thank you. We'll move right into our presentations category. We do have 4 presentations occurring tonight. First up, we have a long-term budget projection presentation with Mr. Ulmer and Mrs. Lepo.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'll thank you for letting me speak to you this evening on a very important topic. And I also want to give a special thanks to Ms. Lepo and also Ms. Banco, who did a lot of the data collection behind the scenes to really put a lot of this information together so that we could present it to you this evening. So I'm really appreciative of that, and that gives me a really nice insight to kind of the budget process that we've used here at Dover and what we should be accustomed to in moving forward. So I'll start with the presentation, if I can get the clicker to work right. Which one? Oh, yeah. New tech. Oh, got to point it. We have a special direction. I'm not pointing the laser at you, Amy, I promise. But I'll start tonight with the review of Washington Township and the succession impact. And the known, I really want to focus right now on the known financial impacts that we have to date. As I can only state the obvious to this group, this is a very fluid situation and we're at a very fluid point of the process. So there's still many questions to be answered, and we have a lot of information still to gather. So I'll just start by reviewing the Washington Township students at this point. We do have 218 total students that are in Dover School District, in York County School of Technology, as well as other off-campus placements. And in addition to those 218 students, we have 15 current cyber charter school students. Point over here. I'm trying. Okay, there we go. Potential revenue impacts. I think it's very important to know that we use the most recent county data, and we really had to take that information regarding Washington Township and really break it down so that we knew what the fundamental revenue from a local aspect is going to be as far as a net loss. So we looked at the real estate collection. The assessed value for Washington Township is $3.5, almost $3.6 million. We looked at our current millage rate as well as the collection rate that we utilize in the budget. And then we net out the homestead farmstead exclusions. So that leaves us with $3,422,000. If you add in the delinquent tax, the delinquent real estate tax, as well as the realty transfer tax for Washington Township, that number grows to $3,672,000. And then you take into consideration the earned income tax. That's approximately $593,000. So adding all those numbers together gives us that $4.265 million that we are looking at as a revenue loss in local revenue. It's also important to note that right now we're not looking at state and federal subsidies, but we do know there will be an impact for our state and federal subsidies as well. I'm trying. There we go. Sorry about that. All right, so looking at the expenditure savings, I went 2 slides, didn't I? There we go. The expenditure savings, we'll start off by just highlighting the debt settlement. That is it's a blank because right now we don't have a number for that. So we're working on that number, but we can only present to you right now what we know. So some of the knowns are special education at $290,000, transportation costs at $133,000, supplies at $26,000, cyber charter tuition $201,000, professional staff, and I want to highlight this says furloughs, but that is attrition. We are not looking to furlough anyone. We are looking at just purely not replacing some of the retirements that we have. So that would be $283,000. And the same goes with support staff. That says furlough, but it would be attrition. It would be looking at the retirements that we have, and that would be a cost savings of $36,000, netting a total of $970,000. So obviously we do the quick math and we put the known revenue loss and the expenditure savings together, and we yield a rounded $3,295,000. So that is the impact that we're going to have with the loss of Washington Township. So again, it's stating the obvious. We're going to have some tough decisions to make, and there's still a lot of information to gather. I won't say this is a totally unprecedented situation, but it's very seldom that this happens. So we have little to go on. So we're kind of just going with what we know to date, and we had to provide the board with a starting point so that we can start our budget process and that you can understand what impacts we may have locally remaining here at Dover. So we're making the best assumptions that we can, and I'll provide to you a little bit of information relative to that coming up. Okay. Other impacts right now in our current financial position, we do have CARES funding. So we have Stimulus 1, Stimulus 2, and Stimulus 3. That's what easily referred to them as. Stimulus 1 was a grant allocation. We've pretty much already expended that on PPE and other protective equipment, cleaning supplies. Round 2 and round 3, we're still working through the budget plan and the spending plan for those. Round 3, we don't even know our total dollar allocation at this point. And I think it's important to emphasize that this is a temporary, one-time stimulus. It's not something that we can bank on in the budget. So looking at those, we don't know how they could impact our we'll say IDEA funding or title funding. So we can't plan on any of that, the CARES money or the ESSER money moving forward. So this is purely just it's temporary in nature at this point. And so we're just utilizing those as one-time funding streams to the district. The other thing that's very impactful right now is the cyber charter impact, which is budget to actual. As you'll note, we had 140 students in 1920, and we're now up to 201 students in 2021. This is a $1.2 million budget swing that we weren't planning for. So that is also a major impact in our current budget for 2021. All right, so I want to just highlight on what we're going to move to what a 5-year projection might look like with the impact of Washington Township. And I want to start with just reviewing some of the assumptions that we're making on the revenue and on the expenditure side. On the revenue side, obviously we took the assessed value for Washington Township out, and so we're only focusing on the real estate growth that we had in Dover Township and in Dover Borough. And we can realize a 1% annual increase in growth at the local real estate level. We're also assuming a 96% collection rate for real estate tax. And then our other revenues, we're assuming a 1% growth. Even with the unknown of state subsidy, we want to be very conservative in this estimation. We don't want to overstate what we think our revenues could be. So we're just, again, taking a conservative approach. On the financial side, we increase salaries in accordance with contractual obligations and presumed contractual obligations. The insurance through the Lincoln Benefit Trust, it's going to grow at an average of 6% annually is what we're estimating based on the projections that they have provided. It isn't necessarily 6% every year, but that is what the average is over the next 5 years. Each year is 6%. Retirement rates are based off of the PSERS projection, and that's provided by PSERS. Those are the employer contribution rates that they project out for the districts. And then our debt service schedule is in accordance with the current schedules that we have, our debt service costs. I also want to note that other expense objects such as service contracts or special education costs, supplies, etc., we've made assumptions in those various cost centers at a 1 or up to 3% increases in those, and that's based on historical data. So again, thank you to Ms. Lepo and Ms. Banco for really putting together some of that historical data information for us tonight. So what does that look like in that total 5-year impact? And I really want to start with the first projection. I'm going to give you two kind of scenarios. One is essentially what I would consider the 0% tax increase for the next 5 years, and the other is really going to be looking at what the base index would be and what that 5-year projection would be with tax increases to just kind of show where we're going to be at. So the first one that I'll start in is the millage phase-in. And so the reason that it isn't 0, if this pointer works, the reason it isn't 0 under the percent of increase and showing a 1.19, a 1.22, a 1.21, so on, that is because when the building projects for the middle school and the high school took place and the financing structure or the financing plan was put together, the district decided at that time for a phased millage increase that would maintain the local effort at a certain amount. So you're going to see 0.28 mills in every year as an increase, and that is again based on the current financing plan that the board approved when borrowing money for the middle school and high school project. So with this approach, you can see that our expenditures do far outweigh our revenues at a pretty increasing rate in the next 5 years. And I really want to focus that on the next slide, which is the impact to fund balance. Sorry. Okay. So the millage phase-in and the impact to fund balance, it's going to be in the 23-24 school year that you will spend down all of your unassigned and committed fund balances that you've built up over the years. And then after that, you have a very quick increase in your deficit. It escalates very quickly. It's not the most optimistic outlook, I'll be honest in saying that. So there are going to be, again, some tough decisions to make on that structural, what I would consider more of a structural deficit that we need to address. The second approach is taking the information from the Independent Fiscal Office. That is an office that works in the state. They project a lot of the Department of Revenue projections. They provided to school districts in February of this year a 5-year projection on the Act 1 base index. So this approach, or this 5-year plan or projection that I'm providing, is looking at increasing taxes in accordance with that base index calculation or projection. I'll also note that in the first year, which would be the 21-22, in this model, we are increasing or projecting an increased taxes at the adjusted index rate, which would be 4.1%. So we see 4.1% in 21-22, 3.5% in 22-23, 3.7% in 23-24, 3.3% in 24-25, and 2.7% in 25-26. Again, this is going to be impactful on our bottom line, and you'll still see that even with a full tax increase in each of those years, the expenditures outweigh the revenues, and we would be operating at a deficit or a projected deficit in every one of those years. So what is the impact to the fund balance with an Act 1 index increase each year? I'll go to the next slide. Maybe. There we go. It bumps us out a year to 24-25, and the increase or the deficit increase is not as sharp. So it just shows how a tax increase does compound. It pushes you out further, and it allows a little bit more flexibility in making some, I'll say, tough decisions when it comes to operating at a deficit. You're looking at personnel, salaries and benefits is a big part of making decisions. You're looking at programs that you would have to cut if you're gonna look at eliminating a structural deficit. So again, this isn't the most optimistic of outlooks, but I think it's information that the board needs to see, and it's information that you need to start evaluating and assisting the administration in direction when it comes to what we have to do relative to expenditure reduction. And then of course, we're gonna do everything we can on our part to increase revenues and find alternative revenue streams wherever we can. But we're committed to continuing to evaluate the data as we get it, especially as we go through this transition process with Washington Township, so that we can continue to provide the board with the most up-to-date information that we have as quickly as we have it. At this point, I think I'll turn the presentation over to Ms. Lepo to talk about the preliminary budget for 21-22.
Thank you, Mr. Almer. Good evening, everyone. Tonight I'm going to present to you the preliminary budget for the 2021-22 fiscal school year. I'm going to just start by going over our budgeting objectives and goals in developing this budget. The first one was that we evaluated and ensured the proper funding is in place for the needs of the district's exceptional students, along with the students with language barriers. We continue to direct resources to educational programs and classrooms. We continue to enhance and build our own Dover Cyber Academy to attract our outside cyber charter students and meet our educational goals. We continued with a site-based budget methodology that encourages a zero-based budgeting culture. And then the other important item is we are continuing to manage and control our fund balance levels for the general and the capital projects funds as we wrap up our current building project and plan for the future. So this is just a history of our financial operations. Again, you can just see there where we ended. These are actual data with our revenue and expenditures. And you can see we've been very fortunate over the past several years where we've had an annual surplus at the end of the year. When you look at it as far as the graph is concerned, you can see the last 3 years our revenue expenditures have been very close. Before I get into how we currently look in our 2021 budget, I just want to recap how we ended the 19-20 school year. So our current balance is at $20,445,983. That top number, the non-suspendable number, was our balance with our Lincoln Benefit Trust for our insurance. And then the committed funds there, you can see that we had committed funds for retirement, technology, medical costs, and debt principal. The assigned capital project, that capital reserve, that was a transfer that was made back in November. That was the money that we experienced in the surplus from last year that we did transfer to the capital reserve. And then we had an unassigned fund balance of about $4.1 million. Again, the total fund balance for the beginning of this year was $20,445,000. This is a budget recap. So this is how we budgeted the 2021 school year. So you'll see there at the top we had our beginning fund balance for the 2021 school year. Our budgeted revenue, $64 million. And I want to remind everyone that that number was based on the beginning of the pandemic. So we were about ready to pass a budget in March, and the pandemic hit. And in April and May, we were trying to update our revenue numbers based on projections of how we felt the economy may play out. So we did reduce our local efforts by a lot as far as the real estate taxes go. We took it from like a 95.5% collection rate down to 94%, and we also reduced our earned income by 9.5%. So we did really reduce our expenditures, our local expenditures due to, our local revenues rather, based on the pandemic. And then our expenditure budget was about 67 million. And we had a budget deficit of 2.7. Now this is looking at how we are projecting the 2021 school year to look. Again, we have our beginning fund balance. We have projected revenue closer to 66.6 million. Our expenditure budget of about 68.2. The next line there you'll see is the transfer to other funds. That includes the transfer to the capital reserve, and then that $10,000 transfer we did, the $10,644 to food service to cover some uncollected debt. And with the revenue and expenditure numbers, we're looking at about a $1.5 million deficit for the 2021 school year. It'll have an overall impact of the fund balance of about 2.4, because you're going to have the transfers out as also as a reduction in your fund balance. So what are the impacts of the 2021 budget? Again, as far as revenues are concerned, I had stated we had reduced our collection rate down to 94. We ended up having a very good year, and we came in at that 96%, which we have seen for the past 3 years. So that was an additional revenue of about $723,000. Our earned income, as I had stated, was reduced by 9.5%. And thankfully, again, we're not seeing that reduction. So we are seeing additional revenue as well in earned income. The one thing I do want to highlight, because this is going to be an impact for several years, is the decrease in our interest earnings. Our state revenue, we are going to be receiving slightly higher amounts in our basic ed and our special ed subsidies of approximately $160,000 over budget. PSERS and FICA is based on our personnel cost. And then I just, again, want to highlight, Matt had mentioned it, that we are using CARES funding in this budget of approximately $1.2 million. And again, that's a one-time expense that we can recognize in this year and in next as well, in next school year. The impacts on the expenditure side of the budget, the professional salaries are estimated based on negotiations. We did budget for 2 funding holidays for the LBT, for our Lincoln Benefit Trust. We are only going to be utilizing 1, and that is mainly because we are experiencing higher claims this year, and we do need to make sure we're reserving the fund balance in that account as well. We're also seeing an increase in unemployment cost. We had an increase of approximately $125,000 in custodial services to ensure that our buildings are sanitized and cleaned properly. And just to note, this is in addition to our own staff. We're of course seeing the $1.2 million increase in our cyber charter schools. We have an additional 60+ students enrolled this year. We've seen an increase in our numbers at York County School of Technology. We've had increased expenditures in supplies due to COVID. And then we've also experienced some increase in utility costs with the new high school. So I'm just going to take a minute here to pause and ask if anyone has any questions of where we stand in the 2021 school year.
I have some questions.
I figured. Thanks, Steve.
Sorry. Didn't want to disappoint you. I've got 3 questions for the both of you. Matt, the first question that I have ties into your presentation. You shared with us that the potential revenue decrease with Washington Township being transferred is a loss of $4.2 million, give or take. Mm-hmm. The cost savings that we know of right now was a little less than $1 million. That represents about a 25% cost to educate those students versus the revenue lost. In my mind, that seems very distorted, and I'm wondering is that a kind of average subset of our students to revenue across the board, or do those particular students, being that there are 200 in a large geographic area which represents more revenue, kind of distort the fact that it's going to impact us harder
Yeah.
than it would for another sampling of 200 students.
That's exactly correct. Obviously, the concentration of your population is in Dover Township and in Dover Borough. So you have a large geographical area. You still have a assessed value of 11%, is it? 11% in Washington Township. But the impact isn't exactly comparable of revenue, and you're automatically going to be able to decrease expenses by that same revenue that you're losing. We still have to offer, those 220 kids don't equate to being able to, in the $4 million that the revenue's generating, doesn't mean you're going to be able to reduce expenditures by $4 million, because that $4 million is associated to those 220 kids. So I don't know if I'm hitting on the question, but the fact is that the revenues and the expenditures, yes, based on the Washington Township geographical area being a non-populous area, a large geographic area, you just can't cut all the expenses for that number of kids to equal $4 million. Just the revenue, I'll say it's it's a revenue-rich area for the number of students that are in that area, if that makes sense.
To me, it's kind of eye-opening that there's that much of a difference, though, and that's what I was getting at. That I knew it wouldn't be a 1-to-1, but I'm really shocked that it's only 25%.
Correct.
That
is shocking to me.
Steve, I just want to make one more comment about that too, is the scenario that we did, again, was known expenditures. So that is allowing some of our staff to stay on, if that makes sense, because we may be able to retain some of those students. Some of those students may still be coming to Dover. So I think Matt's plan only included maybe 2 or 3 teaching positions. Right. If none of those students are staying in Dover, that would reduce our expenditures further.
Okay, that's good to know. The next question that I have has to do with the millage phase-in from our current projects. I was thinking, if my memory serves me right, that millage phase-in was over a span of 7 or 8 years. And then once that got to that point, then it would level off. I'm thinking we're already into that 3-4 years already. So your projections had that millage continuing to be phased in all the way through your 5-year projections, and I didn't think it would be that long. So am I incorrect in that? Am I remembering that wrong?
Well, we'll go back and confirm that, but the data that I had and that we had worked on did have that millage impact all the way through the 5 years that were shown in that projection. Okay. So I'll verify that. We can look back at the schedule and make sure. But my assumption and the information that I had and the schedules that I had, the finance plan was out through the 25-26 school year.
Okay. And then my final question, and this one's kind of maybe a little bit more of a commentary, but just kind of putting things in perspective. This 5-year plan looks pretty dire, looks pretty grim. But in the 7.5 years I've been on this board, we've had several 5-year projections that I can be honest with you, 8 years ago when this was presented, within that 5-year plan we were bankrupt. And after 5 years, we haven't even touched our reserves. So I guess I don't want to cry chicken little here, but to look at it and make it look that bad and realize that we've been through this before. The point I'm trying to make is it is incredibly difficult to plan 1 year in advance, let alone 5 years in advance. And this isn't gospel that we're presenting here, and so correct. I think it's important for everybody who sees that to comprehend that we've been there before, and it's hard to know what you're going to be dealing with 5 years, but we've never had to deal with a $4 million hit all at one time.
There you go. So that is, I think, a very good point, and I would just emphasize that yes, when you are projecting a 5-year budget, it is difficult because you're attributing a percentage increase on the expense side to an accounting code It's the easiest way to do it. To go line by line would take forever. So we go by object codes. We're taking the 100 salaries and we're projecting them out by a certain percentage. Then we're taking 200 benefits and we're calculating all those by a certain percentage. So on and so forth, 300 contracted services, and so on. So when you do that, you're attributing everything in those object codes out, and then you're increasing those annually. And the revenue piece, the only thing we really get to increase, and the only thing we can show, is Act 1, and an Act 1 index and local revenue. We're not projecting state subsidy out at a clip we don't know. We're not forecasting federal dollars out. You know, it's again things that we don't really know and can't really project. And we do have a cap on Act 1, as you know. So when making these assumptions, it is difficult, and it does oftentimes present a dire situation. Now, I can't speak to the past, but the other thing that's very impactful right now is that we're looking at that Washington Township loss of revenue, and that does look dire, and it compounds again what the situation looks like. So I just, yes, don't cry chicken little, but just take the information as it is. It's the best we have right now to make an assumption. We want to put together a 5-year impact, and we want you to see what it could look like. And then, of course, we're basing it on X number of positions, and each year as administration, you look at the value of that position, and do you need to replace every position through when somebody retires. So there's always those cost savings that are also going to happen, because there's going to be some positions that we're not going to need to fill. But then on the same token, there's going to be special ed costs or other things that are going to increase, and you're going to have to maybe add personnel positions as well. So very good point, and I probably spoke long enough about that, but it is just a hard set of assumptions to make when you're kind of painting it with some broad strokes in some categories. So.
But I've got to stress, though, in the past, you didn't lose over $4 million a year.
Correct.
That is huge. We are not reducing our costs $4 million a year. So there is a point where it overcomes all of the fund balance. It just has to. Mm-hmm. So we just can't stress that enough. This is a really unique situation.
Any other questions? Thank you. I'm going to move on to our preliminary budget for the 21-22 school year. So currently, you'll see the projected fund balance there would be, if we lose that, if we come in at the $1.5 million plus those transfers, we'll end up with about a $17.9 million fund balance. Our current revenue without Washington Township would be about $62.7 million, and our expenditures are currently at $67.5. That's leaving us with a current budget deficit of $4.8 million. So here's the impacts of the budget. Right now, this budget for 21-22 assumes the current growth in assessed value for Dover Borough and Dover Township. We have a tax increase built in of 1.22%, or the 0.28 plan millage phase-in. I did bump up the collection rate to the 96%. We have experienced that collection rate for the past 3 years, so I do feel comfortable that we'll come in there again next year. But again, I just want to make note too, because it's a large dollar amount that we have seen in decrease in our interest earnings. For the state, we currently have no increase built in for basic ed or special ed subsidies. At this point in time, we're not getting any indication that there'll be an increase. And then again, PSERS and FICA are based on personnel cost. Another important note is we are using CARES funding for the 21-22 budget of roughly $2 million. So again, I just wanted to show here some proposed tax increases to consider. The current budget with the $4.8 million includes a 1.22% increase, and you can see that generates about $336,000 additional dollars in revenue. And I gave, if you increase it anywhere from 1.5 down to the to the adjusted index of the 4.1%, the additional revenue that it generates. So again, if you went to the adjusted index of 4.1, it would generate about $1.1 million in additional revenue. And again, if you went to the base index of the 3%, it would generate an additional $826,000. And that last column there is the average bill increase for the taxpayer. That's based on assessed value of about $123,000. So you can see there the millage increase would be an annual increase of $35. This is just a comparison of the tax millage rates for York County and where Dover falls. So you can see it there for 3 years. We're right in the middle of the pack. Making the assumption that no other district in York County raises property taxes in 21-22, you can see we'll still fall there in the middle of the pack even if you go to the base index of 3%. So the impacts on the expenditure side of the 21-22 budget, of course our salary increases are currently budgeted at 3% for admin. Professionals increases are built on the estimations based on negotiations. And the support professional contract has 1 more year, and that increase is about 4.8% or 4.08%. There is 1 additional funding holiday taken for the 21-22 school year, and a funding holiday for LBT. And there's no increase, 0 increase in healthcare premium for next year. So we had very good claims experience again in the 19-20 school year, so we were able to recognize a 0% increase. However, the way things are trending for the current year, I don't see a 0% increase for next year. PSERS had an increase of 1.25%. And then, of course, we've experienced some increased cost in unemployment. This again is just some history of the PSERS contribution rate, which we're currently, for next year, will be at 34.94. You can see the projected rates then through the 27-28 school year. This just shows you a graph of where we started and where we are going. So we climbed the big part of the hill, the steep part is over, but you can see we still have an incline to go. We still have roughly about 4% to go. Other major impacts on the expenditure side of the budget, special ed. So we will be adding an autistic support classroom at the high school. This will include 1 teacher and 1 full-time para. We're adding an autistic support classroom at the elementary level, and this is mainly just to accommodate our preschool numbers for next year. That's going to be an additional teacher and an additional para. We are also going to be bringing back an intensive learning classroom at the high school. So we will need to hire an additional teacher and a para, full-time para for that as well. However, since we're pulling that program back from the IU, it'll actually be an approximate savings of $89,000. The transportation contracted services per our contract with EMB will see an increase of about 2.53%. Our cyber charter school expenses are currently budgeted with those 203 students that we currently have enrolled in outside cyber charter schools. So that's an approximate increase of the budget of about $1.2 million. And then we also have about $500,000 to operate our own Dover Academy, our own cyber program for next year. And again, we are going to need to budget some additional money in our utility costs for next year and actually moving forward then. And then all other items of the budget are either at current levels or lower. This just as a quick comparison here of how we would look if our projections played out for the 2021 school year and we experienced that $1.5 million deficit, and how it's reduced down to $13 million, where we currently stand at the $4.8 million deficit. This is just a graph of the history of our fund balance. So you can see we've been able to maintain that nicely for the past couple years. And then this is just a graph of our capital reserve fund balance. For the end of 2021, I'm looking anywhere from approximately $8.5 million to $9 million remaining in that fund after we finish off the 2 building projects and pay the 2 payments or debt service payments that we had calculated and budgeted to come out of that fund. And then the following year projection takes us down to about $7.7 million, and that only includes the budget for the 2 bond payments that are planned. So that doesn't include any other projects that Dave has lined up. So again, I just want to highlight here the preliminary budget overview. Again, budgeted revenue of about $62.7 million. Our budgeted expenditures of $76 million, and a budgeted deficit of 4.8 currently. Looking into the future, again, I just wanted to bring up some budgetary reminders. Again, 2021 is looking approximately like a $1.5 million deficit. The budget projections for next year include a deficit of 4.8. We're applying $1.2 million of CARES funding for 2021. We're applying $2 million of CARES funding for 21-22, and we still are using the funding holidays with the Lincoln Benefit Trust. And again, I think as this year plays out and looking ahead into next year, as preventative surgeries and things are back up and running, we're going to continue to see our fund balance at the LPT decline. The big unknowns are the global transition plan with Northern and the future of our charter school cost. So there is a lot of moving parts to this budget. We still have a lot of work to do. This is not the final budget that you're going to be approving and voting on next month. We will continue to analyze and review the information as we receive it, and then we'll present another budget to you again in April. And again, I think I highlighted a lot of these next steps, but we will need to approve a preliminary budget next year in April so that we can release it for public inspection. And then again, because we have so many moving parts to our budget this year and so many unknowns, we don't necessarily need to approve a budget till June if we don't have enough information. So we're looking again to approve the preliminary next month and then having a final in May and June, depending on how everything plays out with the transition plan. Any further questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt and Jen. I want to congratulate you on very nice presentations for your first time in your new roles with the district. It's obviously not a very pretty picture for us, and hopefully over the next few months we can sort through all of this and work out what we need to work out here. So thank you again for all of your efforts and hard work up to this point. It's very much appreciated. Next on our agenda tonight, we have our Washington Township update. Before we begin, I do have a statement that I would like to read on behalf of the Board of Directors for those who may be watching our meeting tonight. Tomorrow, 3 members of our board, Mr. DeLauder, Mr. Deschaux, and myself, along with our solicitor and chief financial and operations officer, will be meeting with 3 members of the Northern Board and their legal and business officials to continue the discussions regarding the transfer of our Washington Township families. As a district, we feel it would be in the best interest of both parties to petition the courts to delay this process for 1 year, to allow the parties the time needed to properly and completely address every aspect of this transition. There are simply too many unknowns at this time, and we believe that rushing this process will only result in a flawed transition and make this process even more difficult than it already is. We hope that Northern agrees and would join us in this effort. That said, we are committed to doing all that we can to make this transfer as smooth as possible for the families involved. We have advocated for them every step of the way and prevailed in court throughout this effort until one court overturned everything. We then continued that fight all the way to the state Supreme Court, where our appeal was denied with no explanation. None. We share the frustrations of these families and hoped for a different outcome, but now we must move forward and begin the transition process. In doing so, it is important for everyone to know that while we will do all that we can for our Washington Township families, this board has a responsibility to all of the families of the Dover Area School District, and we will protect their interests in these efforts. We will not and cannot do anything that will jeopardize the opportunities we provide for the 3,500 students of our community. As things progress and we continue our conversations with Northern, we will provide you with any updates and information we have as they become available. We appreciate the support of the Dover community during this challenging period and hope that our counterparts at Northern will join us in making this process as seamless as possible for everyone involved. So with that, I will open up the floor to any questions or discussion from our other board members tonight to see what we can possibly answer or not answer tonight. Any questions?
Yes, I have some, and my list is really coming, it's a compilation of questions that have been asked by multiple Washington Township families. Obviously I'm one of them, so some of these questions are mine as well. But I do feel like these are questions that need to be asked in a public setting so that they know that they're being asked, so that they know that they're being heard. I understand a lot of these are probably questions that Dover really can't answer, either because it's not their decision to make or because there isn't enough information to make those decisions. So I will read over my list, and then I don't know, if anybody would want to comment or has a comment after I ask these, but I do feel like it's something that needs to be done. Okay, so will Dover consider allowing its current juniors to stay at no cost to families for their senior year if Northern does not allow this transition process to happen as they have proposed? Is Dover going to ask Northern to assume some of its debt in court? Is Dover going to consider paying for transportation of students to stay in Dover if Northern will not? Is Dover going to petition the courts to ask for an extension, and is that even in Dover's power to do so? Now, Nate, you just said that you're going to encourage Northern tomorrow at the meeting to do that, to ask for that extension. So that's great. Are building principals and staff aware of this situation? What are the results of the last survey sent to Washington Township families? Will the loss of our 220 kids, especially if none are permitted to stay, affect the course offerings and extracurricular offerings for the remaining Dover students? And that was not asked by a Washington Township parent per se. That's, other parents in Dover are concerned about that as well. When will there be a definite plan in place, and how much influence does Dover have over that? And Northern, in some of their correspondence with the Washington Township families, has used language such as that the boards have to come to terms on the joint global transition plan before a final determination can be made, and that they can only move forward when the boards have fully articulated positions on all aspects of a joint global transition plan. I guess the big question is, what exactly is a joint global transition plan? Because our understanding is that, even though Dover's being affected by all of this in some pretty severe ways, Northern, from our understanding, is the one that has to come up with a plan for how to move forward, since we are being transferred to their district. And what is Northern referring to when they say that Dover needs to cooperate with them to make the 3-year transition plan binding? So those are just some of the questions. I think I hit on the big ones. So if anybody has any feedback that they can give, that would be greatly appreciated.
I think there's one simple answer for that, Rachel, and I appreciate all of those questions. They're all great questions that need to be asked at this point. But at this point, we don't have a lot of the answers that we need to have for those questions, and it really would be premature on our part to make any commitments to anything that was asked there as well. As you mentioned, and as mentioned in the statement earlier, we do have a meeting with Northern tomorrow to try and work through some more of this and have some good conversations with their representatives. So hopefully after tomorrow, we'll have more information to come out of this. So I think we could probably address some of that at that point.
And after that meeting, how will the details of the meeting be communicated? Who will receive the communication of that meeting?
I think that will be part of the discussions tomorrow with their board as to how we want to jointly present all of that information in the end as to how it would come out. So again, I think a lot will happen tomorrow. We'll learn more tomorrow. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Pratt or Mrs. Kroon, did you have anything you wanted to add to any of this? Or?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that as far as the staff being informed, we have shared every time there's been a decision made in relation to Washington Township with the staff. Now, they certainly don't have the small details because we don't have the small details yet. So there might be things they don't know, but we have kept them apprised every step of the way, the entire staff, of what's happened. Again, there's not a lot to share other than this decision happened until the plan is in place and everything is worked out.
Okay. Anybody else?
Just to say, thank you for all the support of the district, through these 10 years of this fight for the Washington Township families. I know Dover has, there were some moments early on at the beginning of the 10 years where it was questionable as to how we were going to pull it all together, but Dover rallied and really stood behind us, and it is appreciated. And the Dover families are not angry at Dover, or the Washington Township families are not angry at Dover. They're grateful. They're just hurt and angry and confused. And we know that there's not really, well, there's some areas of blame, but it's certainly not the Dover area school district. So just thank you for all of your efforts. And Tracy for when you came on board and had to continue that fight, and to Ben as well for being there from the beginning. So your efforts are appreciated.
Thank you, Mrs. Maley. Okay, anybody else? Okay, next up we have an update on our swimming pool at the high school. So we have friends from Crabtree Rohrball here, Lobar, Dave Nelson. Gentlemen.
Good evening. I have Nate Walker here from Lobar to kind of give an update from his perspective. I know you hear me say a lot of stuff, but sometimes it's nice to hear it from somebody else. And I also have Scott Cousin from Crabtree Rohrball. So I'm going to let them give you a little presentation, and then if you have any questions you want to ask to them, please do.
Thanks everybody for allowing me to come here and give you guys an update. Back in November, I was here, gave you guys an update on how we had gotten to where we were back then and our plan moving forward. At that time, we were just beginning the foundation improvements to the pool, and I provided you all with a June 4th projected completion date for the pool. Unfortunately, we have had some delays, which you all may or may not be aware of in the past few months. At this point, the updated completion date I can provide you with is August 6th. And at this point, I'd like to run down through some of those delays that have occurred so everybody's aware of what's going on, and you can ask me any questions that you may have. Sure.
Can you adjust the mic up a little bit?
Sure.
I can hear you, but I'm not sure
Okay.
everybody else
Yep.
can. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, sure. So going back to the beginning of the foundation repairs, so when I provided you all with a June 4th completion date, we were hoping that the work that the pool contractor had completed when he originally mobilized would remain untouched. Unfortunately, during the repairs, we were being guided by a professional engineer, and we ended up having to essentially remove everything that they had already done within the pool. That was their wall framing and some under slab plumbing work that they had done.
So that added about 2 weeks onto the schedule from the get-go. After that, the rebar installation had some delays. Part of that was weather. We lost about a week's worth of weather just simply due to snow. Some of that was, it took a few days longer than we anticipated. The biggest thing was when they completed, we were required to have a structural inspection from the pool consultant. The pool consultant came in and failed the rebar. If anybody's seen the pool in that, or the rebar in the pool, there's 37 tons of rebar, and it's required to be extremely precise. And unfortunately, something being a quarter inch out of tolerance is a major fix. So we spent about a week and a half. Lobar even provided some of our own manpower to help expedite the fixes. The pool consultant came back and passed the rebar the second time. At that point, we called our shotcrete subcontractor. He's actually our pool subcontractor's contractor. And he notified our pool subcontractor that he was so busy he couldn't even commit to a day at this point. That was about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. So we spent the last week and a half trying to line up a new subcontractor for the shotcrete work. We have successfully lined another contractor up. They have committed to starting on March 29th, just about 2 weeks from today. And based on that, we're getting to an August 6th completion date. Unfortunately, that's where we're at. We have been committed to you guys in this project for the last 2.5 years. We've been committed since everything happened with this pool. We are as committed as ever right now. We will do whatever we can to get this completed and functional as soon as possible. We will do whatever we can. I just want to reiterate that and let everybody know how committed we are. And again, stress how important of a job this has been to us for the past few years. It's such a shame to us that it has to end this way, but we'll do whatever we can to turn this over to you as soon as possible. So any questions anybody has? I know that's not the news anybody wanted to hear, but I'm here to answer any questions you may have or you may be getting from the community.
It's obviously incredibly frustrating information for us to hear, to hear of the significant delay yet again. What impact will this have on any of our programs with this being delayed until August? Dr. Wiesling, is there any impact with timing here with August and what we might have to do in alternative
Yes,
situations?
it will have an impact on the summer swim programs and DAC offerings. I've already had conversations with Ross Spangler, who's in charge of DAC, and they have already been looking at some alternative sites. He's already contacted some other pools, and he's preparing that because he has a league meeting at the end of March as well. And so he was already looking at some options, considered returning to some of the places that they utilized last summer once the pool was demolished. But he's also looked at some different places. So he and I have been in communication recently to make him aware of the updates that we were looking at, that we were just made aware of also today. So I know he's looking at some options.
Thank you.
Clearly then, if we do have the August completion date, that is good news in the sense that for our own swim program season next winter, then we would at least be able to utilize our natatorium for our own swimming and diving competitions.
Okay, thank you.
I might ask a question or two. The new contractor that's going to get started March 29th, is he going to honor the same contract price that was agreed to from before?
He has not. It's actually a considerable hit, but it's nothing we're pursuing with Dover. We are handling it internally.
Okay. Okay. The other question that I have, I know when you came in November, I believe it was, you had talked about, you'd asked us to consider waiving any kind of late fees, charges, that sort of thing at that point. And, you being a contractor that does this kind of thing, I can understand or appreciate how frustrating it is when your hands are tied, you can't do it yourself, and you need other people to do it, and this year's been no exception, maybe worse than ever. Have you ever been in this position before where something got delayed and went way longer than you ever expected? And if you have, how have you handled that? How has other boards handled that? If other school situations, this is new to us, so
Sure.
you know, where should we be? What should we be thinking
Sure.
at this point?
Yeah, we do run across this more often than we would like. Fortunately, in those circumstances, it's not as specialized of a trade, so we can either supplement with our own manpower, or there are plenty of other contractors out there who we can bring in and supplement. Unfortunately, with a pool subcontractor, they're so specialized that our hands were literally tied. And you know, I'm asked quite often why we didn't just fire him or hire somebody else. And the biggest reason there would be he had procured a lot of material, which we'd already paid him for, that was being stored in an insured warehouse of his own. But also, just the pool industry, there's so few contractors, especially that could do a pool this size. It would be months and months and months and months until we could have even thought about getting somebody on site. So getting rid of this guy and bringing someone else in, you'd be looking at another 6-8 months on top of where we're at now until we have a pool. So I guess to answer your question, yes, we do run into that, but I've never been in a spot with something this specialized where we've been unable to supplement.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes, I do. I have two questions. One is concerning the tolerances of the pool and the failure of that. I'm assuming with such a narrow tolerance that this was all laser shot prior to
Correct.
the installation of the rebar. I guess, how can it be, if you're shooting something with a laser, how can you mess up to the point where you've got to make major corrections?
So,
I guess that's not on you. Second part of that question is, obviously this falls back on the pool contractor. Is he being held liable? Is he being asked to contribute to, I guess, are there any costs that he's absorbing because of these issues that are his fault
yeah,
at this point?
there are no costs that we are back charging to him, and the reason for that is the reason he got where he is now, from what he has relayed to us, is because of COVID. He's from Trenton, New Jersey, and at the time all the lockdowns happened, he had work going on in New York City and outside New York City. They were completely shut down. He had guys who refused to work. He had subs who refused to work, and he was so backed up that it was, 4 or 5 months later till he could even, till he was, from the date he was supposed to be on site, it was 4 or 5 months later till he was able to mobilize. So we are not penalizing him due to essentially a COVID claim. On your laser question, the bottom of the pool has 12 inches of stone, and there's a thick layer of rebar mat. So that sits on chairs. And unfortunately, as it was walked on or material was set on it, it would slowly sink. And even a 1/4 inch, that bottom mat is tied to all the vertical bars. So that 1/4 inch would pull everything down, or the 1/4 inch in the mat would pull the walls down. Mm-hmm. And so you had, a little bit here, a little bit there, and it became a mess. At that point, what took so long was we had a mixture between trying to jack the slab up, and if you've got tons and tons of rebar, it's not as simply as just pulling the rebar up. We were actually jacking it up, and then also cutting rebar loose and retying it, and actually putting a lot of new rebar in.
And I wanted to just comment on your reasoning from the pool contractor. I will give him that COVID really messed things up as far as him being able to get started with the project. And I won't hold that against him, especially coming from the greater New York area. But I guess to me, it sounds like anything that's happened, anything that even up to this point that is not happening correctly, he's attributing to COVID. And I can't take that as an excuse. You know, if you mess up on a job, because whether, you know, settling or whatever, but don't blame it on COVID. I think that's a lame excuse, in my opinion. I know it has nothing against you, and you really can't do anything about that, but I really think that's a lousy excuse.
Just to clarify, the COVID was the initial delay, and that resulted in the biggest delay, which was the soil issues.
Right.
You know, we excavated the pool out, and actually a separate prime did with our coordination, based on when we thought he was coming. So the pool sat, and also to the site prime's defense, they needed to pave the whole front parking lot and even the road back. So they didn't want to have excavators and heavy equipment running over freshly placed asphalt to get back and excavate out the pool. So the pool excavation sat for a number of months, and by the time the pool contractor mobilized, started the work, he realized that the soil had begun to slough. It sat, it was an open excavation for months and months, and that led into all the soil concerns and was the reason for the added soil nailing foundation support.
Okay.
So unfortunately, a few month initial COVID delay turned into a major, even more major delay.
Understood.
Yeah.
Understood. But I just hope, again, he's not using, you know, this latest delay, that he's not blaming that on COVID-related issues. I just think that's, if he is, that's wrong and inappropriate in my opinion. So, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else? As frustrating and disappointing as this information is to me, I do want to thank you for all of your work that you've done at this point. The board had the opportunity to tour the new high school and the renovated middle school last week, and the work is really top-notch. Very impressed with what we saw. We think we have great spaces for our students now. The limited number of people that have been able to come in from outside in the community to the auditorium, the gym, things like that, their words are wow. You know, this is really amazing what we've done for our community and our students. So thank you for everything you've done at this point on that.
Thank you.
And we'll get through this issue with the pool too, I'm sure. So
Thank you.
I do have a question, probably more for Dr. Wiesling though. You know, I understand that Coach Spangler is working on alternative places for the high school swimmers to swim, which is very important. They need to keep up their skills throughout the summer, of course. But what about DAC? So last year DAC couldn't have a club. This year it sounds like they're not going to have a pool either. You know, DAC feeds our high school swim team, and we need those kids to love swim. We need those kids to be involved in swim. We need those kids to improve at swim. So is there any way that we can somehow, and I realize it's a club, and I guess, you know, if we're going to accommodate to that club, we've got to figure out how do we accommodate to all the clubs during this time of COVID, but I just really feel like, you know, is there a plan being put in place for them?
It's my understanding, talking with Coach Spangler, is that his meetings that he's having and his looking at other venues is to also accommodate DAC.
Okay.
Yeah, DAC is the overarching, he explained that DAC is the overarching organization, and that they have their competition, their league events, and then they also have summer swim programs.
Right.
So, yeah, the whole looking for additional venues is also to support their competition.
Okay.
And practice.
All
Yeah.
levels?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. As far as I know, whatever he can acquire or accommodate as far as time available. He's looking at LA Fitness. He's already had conversations with LA Fitness, and also he's shared with me he already spoke to Green Valley.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think, like we had to endure for the season, with clearly being turned down by several other pools because of COVID, we had to, you know, we were privileged to have Graham Aquatic give us the time, but that was also balancing what they already have scheduled with their own leagues and West York was also using their facility and always uses their facility on an annual basis. So I think Coach Spangler's working with the other available pools and balancing out what programs they already have. So you know Coach Spangler, he is so prepared and on top of things, and so he's already working on those in preparation for his league meetings at the end of March.
Okay.
And Mrs. Kroom and I we decided recently that we needed to bring him in on the updates of what was going on so that he could also prepare appropriately. Okay, so I'll do whatever, obviously I will do whatever I can. And our plan moving forward, Mrs. Maley, truly, you had talked about the DAC and utilizing our facilities. You kind of touched upon organizations. We are in the process right now of working on, now we won't have our pool, unfortunately, in a timely fashion to do that for DAC this summer, but we are working as a committee and as a district to try to figure out how we are going to make our facilities available for our feeder programs that are so important to the success of ours.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next is our public comment period. This is for items on or off of the agenda, and I do understand from Mr. Perkins that we do not have anybody waiting to speak tonight. So we'll move on to Board President's communication.
Nate,
And,
sorry, can I just interrupt? So I know that we do from time to time get written public comment that through our system on, I guess on the website, people can write in or email or whatever. Do those get read? I mean, at school board meetings, or should they be read at school board meetings? Because if it's public, how does the public know what people are saying if it's not?
We haven't typically, because we haven't gotten any. They're really intended for you, but I mean, that's up to you.
Okay. I mean, I just feel like if it's public comment, it should be public somehow.
Well, they're written comment. So, I mean, you
Okay,
can.
it's a written comment. Okay,
Yeah.
I see the difference. Okay.
In the past, when we actually had Washington Township situation a couple years ago, we provided all of you with them in writing. Remember our papers? So that's how we've done it. But you can decide however. Like I said, we rarely get any, but you certainly can do what you want with that.
Maybe it's something worth discussing.
Right. Board President's communication. I just have two things to announce. We did have an executive session immediately prior to tonight's meeting to discuss legal matters relating to the district. And then I did also want to thank our Dover FFA chapter. They provided all of the directors with a nice little treat jar tonight. They know the way to our hearts with chocolate and candy and all that kind of good stuff. Those students do amazing things in our district, so we thank them for sharing that with us. So, with that, we will now move on to the approval of our minutes category. So right now, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the February 16th, 2021 board meeting.
Move. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, Mrs. Almond?
Rawhauser, were you able to vote?
Nothing showed up.
Did you join the meeting, or were you still in the view of the agenda?
Which one do I hit? Do this. Where you want me to hit go?
Not able to join.
Okay, you can give a verbal vote.
Yes.
He couldn't exit out of it, Steve? He has to exit out and go back into the meeting.
And the motion carries. Now we'll move on to our consent agenda. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve all items listed under the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mrs. Cream, would you like to walk down through this?
So a couple items of interest tonight. First, one of the first things you're approving, if you'll remember, Dr. Wiesling and I in a little bit are going to ask you to approve revised health and safety plans. One of the first things on the list is for you to approve the seniors to go on a Hershey senior trip a couple days before graduation. So that is one of the first things, and we're excited to bring you something normal to approve. There are a couple virtual assemblies for the elementary schools, a number of agreements for extra services for our students. At this time, none of them are additional cost to you. And then finally, a very generous donation of a router to the high school CTE department.
Any questions?
I just wonder, is it worth mentioning publicly who the donor is of that for the CTE department?
Do that. Let me find it. Here we go. We can do that. So we have Madison Bay Company. Troy Live has donated a router in the amount of over $14,000 to our CTE department. So very, very generous donation. Thank you.
Very nice. Any other questions? I just wanted to mention that we do have 2 retirees listed on here. Between the 2 individuals, Janet Johnston and Nancy Hankey, they have given 49 years of service to the district. So we thank them for that and wish them all the best in their upcoming retirements. Any other questions on the agenda?
I'd just like to say that they will be greatly missed, greatly missed.
I had a question regarding the transfers there. And I know this is a personnel issue, but I was wondering about the transfers related to the cyber program and what your thoughts were on that, and why that transfer was necessary.
So this year, as you're aware, we really put extra energy into our cyber program and looking into outside cybers and why students were leaving. And to do that, we needed to appoint somebody to that. So Mrs. Weekland, we put her in that position for this year. And because we didn't have athletics running at full tilt and CTE wasn't leaving the district, we felt that Dr. Wiesling and Mr. Benton could help Jen Fasik along with the other assistant principal at the high school this year. So Mrs. Weekland, we put her over into the cyber program. What she's been doing is beefing up our cyber program for next year in order to bring back outside cyber students to a huge cost reduction for us, but also to start on the path of trying to bring some of our students back. As you saw in the budget presentation, we have gone from 140 cyber students to over 200, which has taken us, I think, over $1.2 million over our budget. So this is something we needed to do. Going into next year, I believe we're going to start in a similar situation with cyber school. We don't know if students will be vaccinated yet, but I do think we will be expected to offer some options to parents. We will still be wearing masks and those things. So it seemed to make sense to try and continue working on our cyber school into the future anyway. And I do believe that with what happened this year, parents have gone out to cyber, and I think it is an area that is going to continue to draw parents away from brick and mortar schools. So with that thought in mind, a high school assistant principal, we cannot add another position. You saw the budget, that isn't possible. Down the road maybe, but not right now. So the high school assistant principal was not the appropriate place to do it, and Mrs. Weekland is absolutely the person to do it. So it made more sense that at a middle school, because we have 2 assistant principals there with just very different expectations, that she will do both those positions. She will do the middle school assistant position and the cyber school coordinator position. And then in turn, it made sense then, well, I can't have 3 down there, that I would put, forgot his name. Mr. Lugar, thank you, at the high school. And he would then be at the high school. So that is the rationale behind it. The hope is, as the year goes on and Mrs. Weekland brings a number of students back, helping the budget, if this becomes the future part of the future of education. I do believe it's going to. The district will probably want to consider appointing a full-time cyber person to run the cyber school.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So Tracy, so that means we'll have a principal at the high school and one assistant principal at the high school, which will be Mr. Lugar, and then at the middle school, there'll be a principal and one assistant principal?
No, we also have another principal at the high school right now. So it'll be, yep, we have two assistants,
Okay.
two assistants, two assistants. But as you know, there's one less grade at the middle school, and the nighttime activities are not as taxing at the middle school, and it's just a different kind of job than the high school has. And keeping her at the high school and doing that won't work. That absolutely won't work. So, yeah.
And both were asked if they wanted, if it was okay to move, or, okay.
Yep, we discussed it.
Anybody else? Okay, hearing none, Mrs. Almond. And the motion carries. Next, we'll move on to safe and supportive schools. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the revised district health and safety plan.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Questions or discussions? Mrs. Kroom, did you just want to mention the highlights of the changes that have been made?
So in my health and safety plan, in the district health and safety plan, the only two things we're asking, the pandemic committee's asking you to approve is, number one, currently it says due to the changing nature of the pandemic situation, no field trips will be approved. We are adjusting that to field trips will be very limited. And so that allows us to allow the seniors to go, and if there is another special field trip that comes up. The other one is the travel statement. The old statement said that students were required to present proof of a negative COVID test if they've traveled out of the state. As you know, that's changed, so we needed to take that out and just replaced it with that the district will follow the Department of Health's current travel plan. So those are the two pieces for this health and safety plan.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Mrs. Almond? The motion carries. Now I'll entertain a motion to approve the revised district athletic and extracurricular health and safety plan.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Questions or discussion? Mrs. Kroom, did you want to do the same thing for this, or Dr. Wiesling?
Very
or?
quickly.
Very quickly. Okay. Yeah, I have a lot more items than Mrs. Kroom did. However, three basic categories. In the original plan, there was the reference to the different phases, the green and yellow phases of the governor's plan at that time. So over the course of the summer, fall, and winter seasons, we made our mitigation practices change according to PWA and YAIAA, but we didn't change that and get rid of that language of the limitations of 25 indoor and 250. That's where the phases, the color phases are mostly referenced, where we now are operating with the governor and Department of Health's mitigation orders regarding occupancy limits. So that's where most of those changes are. We also made some changes to reflect the most recent face covering orders. Again, we made those mitigation practice changes throughout the seasons when they were occurring. This is just the time to clean up that language in this document to make sure it's reflecting. We did add that general statement that we would adhere to the guidelines that were the current governor and Department of Health orders. We're just now making sure that we make those changes permanently here and date it, that it's a reference date change. The other thing the biggest thing that we are looking at is regarding the currently underneath identifying and restricting non-essential visitors and volunteers. Currently, what we started with was restrict the limit facilities usage to outside organizations. And that's what I was referring to you, Mrs. Maley. We are right now in the process of looking to see, as a committee, looking at our policy, looking at our facilities, how we can start entertaining. We know we want to have our organizations come in and start utilizing our facilities. So, but we want to make sure we're doing it cautiously. We want to make sure that we're still adhering to the guidelines. And so what I would like to propose with that, where the section was restrict limit facilities uses to outside organizations, we would put that all outside organizations requesting approval for indoor and outdoor facility use must provide the Director of Athletics and Student Activities with a health and safety plan for approval prior to use. Approval will be considered on an individual basis. No requests for indoor facilities will be approved while students are still in session for the 2020-2021 school year. That gives us a chance to start looking at, we have to really, on a side note, look at policy, the use of facilities policy, and we're going to be discussing that this Thursday at our facilities committee to start seeing where we have new facilities that we have to actually add to the policy and consider some of those dynamics of those new facilities. So we want to make sure that we're starting to start the process. We really want to be concerned about indoor facilities right now, so that's why I'm proposing that we wait until students are out before we would start approving those, but start giving consideration on an individual basis. Start allowing those requests to come in and start considering what we can do safely to still protect our students, our staff, and our community.
Thank you,
Question for you. What is the mask requirements for spring sports, and along that same line, with the mask requirements for participants in winter sports, how did that go? How did it work okay? Did any of the students have issues with that? I was just curious if you could maybe give us a little bit of report on how that worked. The change from fall to winter season in the face coverings was the governor required that athletes wear the face masks during physical activity. That was not a requirement in the fall. It was just while you were on the sideline, if you were unable to maintain 6-foot social distancing. But in the winter season, it was required to wear them at all times. Our athletes were fantastic, absolutely fantastic. To see those individuals participate in a lot of those endurance activities, it just was amazing, the resilience they had, and they did it well. I have to also applaud our community members because we were allowing spectators, home spectators, into our indoor venues, and I'm telling you, they did it the right way. They were just so, I think, appreciative of being able to come in and watch their children participate, that they just did what they needed to do. And because the order was spectators, athletes, coaches, officials, everybody had to wear those face coverings at all times. So, in my perspective, my observations, we did a fantastic job. And I think as a league, when we talked about it on a monthly basis, as we were talking about our ups and downs, our challenges, in general, our league, I think, also did a fine job in maintaining the integrity of that order and how we were able to get our athletes to participate. Now, leading to what it is currently for spring sports, it is the same order. That has not changed. The order still applies as it was revised in November. However, the dynamic that's a little bit different now is that we have outside sports, whereas in the winter, it wasn't as much of a challenge because indoors, it was clear. The indoor order requires that they are worn at all times by everybody in attendance. Now, when you go outside, they do have it does have some language that says if you are able to maintain a 6-foot social distance or physical distance, now it's defined, with the members of your current household, it can be relaxed a little bit, okay? So the governor's order does say that. Now, YAIA League also adopts their own guidelines that they add to or enhances the PIAA guidelines, and as a league, we have determined that for our participation purposes, we are going to require them to be kept on at all times. All right, athletes, the language is
They have to be wearing them at all times outside as well, unless they are able to maintain a sustained 6-foot physical distancing. So we're looking at the roles of those athletes where the movement, the actual activities themselves, they can't maintain a 6-foot social distance, physical distancing at all times. Then the league is identifying where they are required to wear those face coverings. Now, men's lacrosse, boys lacrosse, for example, it has been deemed by the governor and CDC to talk about how the inclusion of a helmet and a mouth guard and then an additional face mask could present a medical concern. So we are utilizing the fact that lacrosse players, boys lacrosse players, wear a helmet and a mouth guard. So that is the one sport that we, PIAA and YAIA, are allowing to, while participating with their helmets on, they don't have to wear the face masks. The goalie in the girls lacrosse program also has to wear a helmet and a mouth guard, so that's another position where the face mask will not be required. But then those same athletes, though, as they are arriving to the venue, if they're standing on the sidelines, if they're, anytime they have their helmets off, the order does require that they have to wear their face masks. Okay?
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Wiesling.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Almond. And the motion carries. Next up, we'll move on to our capital projects category. First, I'll entertain a motion to approve the attached middle school change orders.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Nelson, you will just want to give us some quick highlights for each of these? There are 7 of them.
Yes. I'll start with, these are all for the middle school, so I'll start with at the middle school. We had some damage when we were moving some of the skids of material around, moving in and out, and that's the first one for $3,224. We had to repaint some corridor walls. And then the next one is for some additional blue duct. This is actually at the high school, I'm sorry, for $5,020. And then number 7, which is Myco Mechanical, was some boiler venting extension. We had some issues with some odor coming into one of the classrooms, so we had to raise the boiler vents up a little bit for $2,300. Excuse me. And then we had a section in the back of the building kind of going out towards the greenhouse that the floor had sunk down on one side about an inch, and we had 2 choices. It wasn't really moving anymore, but we either had to jackhammer it all out or we just top coat it, so we decided to top coat it. That was for $900. And then we had to re-inspect our chairlift because the inspector didn't like how they did something. They forgot to add something, so we had to pay another $1,000 to get it re-inspected. And then there were some additional whiteboard overlays in 3 different classrooms for $36.90.
Okay, any questions? Mrs. Almond? And the motion carries. Next, I'll entertain a motion to approve Plan Con H.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Questions or discussion? Could someone explain this a little bit for the public who may be watching, what this is?
Yeah, Plan Con is a program run by the state government to help reimburse and finance school projects. And it's a pretty comprehensive and long program. And I mean, we're on Part H right now, so we started with Part A. And I think if I'm right, there's probably 4 or 5 more to go. I think so. But yeah, I think it's 3 more to go. But yeah, so we're not quite done with this yet. But this is, though, once we're all done the project, over the next several years, we'll get money back from the state to help finance the high school. We did the same thing on both Dover Elementary and Waglestown project when we did those. We did a plan cron.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, Mrs. Ullman? The motion carries. And finally, I'll entertain a motion to grant authorization to solicit bids for the Intermediate Avenue extension per Dover Township's directive.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Questions or discussion? Mr. Nelson, did you want to give us a highlight on this one too?
Yeah, this was when we were doing our approval for building construction of the high school. Dover Township required us to finish the road from the end of our current Intermediate Avenue back to the property line at Stony Lane. So this is part of that. They also required us to do intersection improvements at Canal Road and Intermediate Avenue, and intersection improvements at 74 and Mayfield. So we just got approval for the Intermediate Ave and Canal Road. We're still waiting on approvals for 74. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nelson. Anybody else?
I was just curious if there is a plan to repave Intermediate Avenue at some point. I know it's in kind of rough condition right now, so I know there was some plan at one point.
Yep, that is, and that'll be done by Able Construction, who is doing the apartments and stuff in back of up on the hill.
And Dave, how are they going to improve Mayfield and 74? I mean, Mayfield is essentially almost like an alleyway there. What
They're not really doing much to Mayfield.
Okay.
74, they're going to add turn lanes. So you can turn into Mayfield, left turn into Mayfield.
Is there room for that?
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is all required. Actually, the intersection improvements at Mayfield and 74 and Canal and Intermediate Avenue are being required by Pennsylvania State, not by the township. So I might have said that wrong when I started. It's a mess, let me tell you. We've been working on permits for over a year. So.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Anybody else? Okay, Mrs. Ullman? The motion carries. Unity Council, Mrs. Maley.
Okay, so we had our meeting on March 4th. We reviewed some of the ground rules for dialogue that we're establishing as a council, kind of just, rules for general respect and acceptance and with an open mind. So continue to talk about those. We had a breakout room session where there were 2 different articles, so you were assigned to one or the other. Kind of the takeaway from both articles, discussion revolved around mental health issues from loneliness to burnout, and also kind of compared some of that, some of those emotions that were felt during the COVID pandemic. Talked about the importance of acceptance and not just tolerance. Our teach-in event, Whose Lives Matter, we had 68 registrants with 55 live attendees, so that was a good turnout for our first event. I was not able to tune in live, but from the feedback, people were very appreciative of that. So hope to do more of those in the future. The merchandiser fundraiser, we had 104 orders. We made $524. And 20 cents, and those funds will be shared between Project Harmony and the Unity Council. Trying to figure out how to promote, the merchandise in other kinds of ways, maybe even get it into the store at the high school, those types of things. Still working on membership roles and responsibilities. Dennis has taken over as board chair since I will be leaving. We still need a community chair. We also need a student chair. We need an event organizer lead, somebody from, hopefully from the community who will lead that organization or that section. And we also need somebody to head up the professional development. So if anybody's interested, either among the board members or in the community, let us know. Our next date will be April 1st at 6 via Zoom. And we're also looking to pick a date for our Spring Unity event for next year so that we can start to reach out to vendors and agencies and, any kind of entertainment or speakers, so we can start doing that now. And that's it. Dennis, did I miss anything?
Nope.
Okay.
Any questions for Mrs. Maley? Okay, thank you. Mr. Emig, York Adams Academy.
First thing I have to report is that it is with sadness that our director is moving on. He has taken another position in another school district, so we are currently looking for a new director for York Adams Academy. Our next meeting is scheduled for March the 30th via Zoom, and currently we have 6 seats filled with 10 open seats. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Emig? Okay, Mr. DeLauder, York County School of Technology.
All right. Well, first of all, I just want to say I wasn't unable to attend our meeting due to internet issues at my home. So what I'm going off of are the notes from that meeting. Just a couple things. First, on their budget, they did have the required 2/3. I think it's 2/3 of the districts did approve the budget, so their budget for this year has been approved. Second, update on the gym. They're saying the interior of the gym is expected to be completed by the end of March, and the exterior by the end of April, weather permitting. And there were, tours offered to the JOC members on March 4th and 5th, which unfortunately I couldn't go because they were in the middle of the day. And then finally, each month, each academy in there recognizes students as part of their Students of the Month. And for this month, we had a Clayton Ryder from Dover, who is a senior in the automotive technology. Again, he was selected by his academy teacher for his outstanding performance in that. So I just wanted to recognize him. And that's all I've got.
Okay, questions for Mr. DeLauder? Okay, LIU, Mrs. Kroom.
I'd like to publicly thank the LIU 12 for doing an amazing job with the COVID shots for the teachers. As of today, we are well over 200 of our staff got vaccinated through this. A reminder, we have about 500 staff, and then we have an additional 50 or so bus drivers and such. By Friday, about 60% will be all vaccinated. They are extending into a second wave Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. They are opening up to everyone who didn't choose to do it or couldn't do it. So we expect a lot of our staff to get done. This time around, this weekend, they're allowing paid coaches, substitutes, and student teachers to be vaccinated. But again, I cannot say enough about what a great job the LIU 12 did and how in and out and quickly they were and efficient, and it was great. And I will tell you, we had a huge number of sick teachers on Monday who did take, we had a lot. What ended up happening is because they had open slots, we were able to slide the rest of our staff in, and a number of them went Saturday and Sunday. So we originally thought 206 on Saturday. Well, it ended up being more on both Saturday and into Sunday and Sunday night. So Monday was rough, and bless the teachers who came in. Many of them didn't make it much into the day on Monday and left when they had it on Sunday. So
Tracy, are you saying this coming weekend, our staff will have it? So do you anticipate, I mean, maybe you don't have those numbers right now of how many are going to take the opportunity, but are we going to be in the same position come Monday again? Where
No.
We'll have a lot of people, okay.
No, as a matter of fact, we probably have about 15 staff getting their vaccines through this week. And it is mostly high school, so high school concerns us, but not enough to affect our schedule. And we do expect enough this Saturday and Sunday, but again, they're anybody. This first round was very specific, elementary and moved up, so we knew where we were going to be hit. And we knew we were going to be hit at the middle school, because the middle school all got in on the first wave. And that is actually where our attendance was the most difficult on Monday morning. And honestly, I was most concerned about our bus drivers. We had a number of bus drivers. They all got theirs. A lot of them got theirs Saturday. I was really worried about just getting the buses rolling on Monday morning. So.
Thank you. Questions for Mrs. Kroom? Okay, Mr. Rawhauser, Legislative and York Learning Center.
No report.
Okay, Mrs. Brinton, PSBA.
So the big news was that on last Thursday, President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan after the House concurred with Senate amendments. It's a $1.9 trillion pandemic recovery legislation. It provides $122.7 billion for existing elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund to remain available through September 30th, 2023. $3.03 billion in additional fiscal year 21 funding for IDEA, provides $800 million to support the identification, enrollment, and school participation of children and youth experiencing homelessness, including through a wraparound service, provides $7.27 billion available through September 2030 through the Federal Communications Commission's, the FCC E-rate program to address the homework gap. The Emergency Connectivity Fund will allow eligible schools or libraries to buy devices such as Wi-Fi hotspots, routers, etc., provide connectivity for students and staff and library patrons, and provides $2.75 billion to governors for emergency assistance to non-public schools. And that's just a brief summary that I have. PSBA has a great resource for additional details, and I'm happy to either send them to you or you can check out their website for additional details.
Thank you. Any questions for Mrs. Brinton? Okay, Mrs. Herman, Dover Industrial Development Committee.
Our February meeting was canceled. Next meeting is next Wednesday.
Thank you. Superintendent's report, Mrs. Kroom.
All right, on the agenda, you will have attached this document, and it is basically about a month ago, I sent you a letter we received from a number of legislatures that warned school districts not to use all of this COVID money for things like salaries and things you have to pay for every year, because it is a one-time payment and it's going away. So I shared that letter with you, and I think I said that, I might have shared this document, but I said I would discuss it a little more at the board meeting. So basically there, if you look at, Amy, can you pull up Amy's going to pull up the chart. You will see these are basically the different CARES Act funding that we have gotten since the beginning of COVID. And you'll see the different amounts and when they were approved and what year they are to be spent in. The gist of all of these are you could break down where we spend our money into, number one, salary and benefits. And you're probably going to say, you just told us you're not supposed to use it for salary and benefits. But the fact is we wanted to use some significant money to offset those extensive cyber costs that hit us so hard this year, and you were not allowed to use any of the money for that. So what we did is we underwrote a number of our salaries and then in turn use that money to help offset some of that significant cyber costs. So that was very, very important for us. Much of this money went into online apps, materials, and services, especially when COVID first started for us to purchase. A lot of this money went into hardware. We purchased hotspots for our disadvantaged families. We purchased computers for our cyber school students. We purchased instructional materials like home ec kind of materials for kids who were doing things at home. We spent a lot on cleaning. We did cleaning prior to the pandemic, during the pandemic, and supplies, of course. And of course, we did PPE supplies. We did masks. We did air purifiers. We did hand sanitizers. So there is a whole document with a more exhaustive list on your agenda for you to look at, because we wanted you to understand that this money we got Again, I need to say it again. It is helping to offset the deficit, but it's only one-time money and then it's gone. ESSERS 3, as Amy was just talking about, is coming our way. It looks like we are in for about $4.8 million around there, and it hasn't opened yet. 20% has to be used for students to help gap their learning loss. So that's about 400,000 or so we will need to use, and then the rest. A lot of the next round money is geared towards improving air quality and things in your building. So we will be working on that with many, many people. That's a lot of money to figure out how to use. And again, it can't be used to underwrite your budget because it goes away. It's not here permanently. So that's one. Again, you can look at that. And the other thing I wanted to share with you is just that we are seeing an uptick of cases in our buildings. Other districts have been closing schools around the area, so they are also seeing an uptick. So even with the changes in the mitigation efforts, masks are still required, social distancing is still required. We are moving forward. We are extremely pleased that we are where we are in the school year and have only had to close the high school more than one time. The rest of the buildings we have only had to close once, and 2 elementaries we never closed. So I think that is pretty darn impressive for 5 days a week, face to face. But we are seeing an uptick, so I don't think it's time to relax, and that's why you will see some of the information we talked about, not allowing extras into our buildings until after school's out in June, and we don't have the kids anymore. Again, we told you about how we're adjusting things. Poor Jen Fasik, every time they allow more people, it adjusts graduation. So there is more discussion about graduation and prom and those kinds of things. So that'll be coming your way. And just finally, I will not be at the meeting on Thursday. Dr. Cartwright will be here in my stead. I'm not available Thursday night. So we're excited to have her here in this seat.
Any questions?
Yeah, Tracy, so I'm looking on our, on the dashboard on our website, and it's showing that there are 0 positive cases in each of the buildings. Now, there are 21 quarantined at the high school and 10 quarantined at Live, according to this. So I'm not...
So when we shut down on Monday, that was our 3 days out of the building we could turn back to 0, which is what we did. Okay. In the meantime, we got 2 more cases reported today. But they're from last week, so we can stay at 0. So... But they are out there, and I will tell you, you can talk to some parents around here, a couple of them sitting right over there, their schools have closed for their kids. So this is not gone, and it is not time to lighten up. I will tell you, as the adults do get vaccinated, we are going to talk about allowing them to have in-person meetings and allow them to have lunch together, but everyone has to be vaccinated if we allow it. So we're not there yet. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. We're getting there, and they're doing a great job.
Yeah, I do. You had made mention of trying to have funding for gaps in learning, trying to bring them back up. Do we have any sense of where our students are at this year? Are we seeing a lapse in there, or are we doing well?
We are. We're doing well. I mean, we're doing well, but we have seen gaps. We do benchmark assessments outside of PSSA every marking period. So we've been able to track that at every level. So that's really good. Where we are truly struggling and where we're putting a lot of energy in is to our families that students were at home, chose to stay at home. Even if they stayed home for 1 marking period, a lot of them are struggling. We have a lot of them who became attendance issues. A lot of them didn't complete work. So that is where it's going to be a lot of gaps, and we're going to have a lot of work to do with those students. But students we had in school are doing a very, very good job. Very good job.
And with that, from the state level, I know there's, with all this reporting and the data and such, are they making any allowances for understanding the situation that schools are in with this year concerning like growth and things like that, as far as those models?
Right. So we are giving PSSAs and Keystones, where they're going to do, I think, similar to what they did last year. Data is not counting in teacher evaluation for this year. I think our school performance profile, our Future Ready Index, a number of those items they weren't on there last year. We can't have growth because we didn't test last year. So we can't even use that as a metric. So I think they are. So it's more internally that I think we're looking at our growth and we're looking at how we did. We're not actually, too concerned about the PSSAs and the Keystones. They'll take care of themselves. But I don't see the PDE being a heavy hitter with any districts that struggled this year at all.
So our students are making gains through the
Yes.
year, okay? Because I think that's,
Yes.
something we seem to be overlooking that this year with so much focus on the COVID
Yes.
itself. I just want to make
Yep.
sure that
Yep.
the education part
Absolutely.
hasn't been overlooked.
Our benchmark assessments have gone on all year, and we do that faithfully at our elementary school and middle school especially, in language arts and math. So absolutely, we've done them all year.
So we've made such progress, I don't want to see that
Absolutely.
go away. So,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Tracy, just, you might not know the answer to this, but at this point, what's the percentage of students in school versus those who are fully at home?
Brad, I see him sitting over there, we are almost fully back in. What, maybe 3% are still at home? It's a really low number. Kids are back in school, yeah, which is wonderful. Yep.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, thank you, Mrs. Kroom. Any other observations or comments from our board members tonight? Hearing none, Mr. Perkins, we're at our last public comment period. Did anybody arrive?
Nobody arrived.
Okay. Okay, with that, our future meetings. This Thursday, we have board committee meetings beginning at 6:00 p.m., and we will have a board planning meeting at 7:00 p.m. And then for the board members, we will meet immediately after the board planning meeting at a brief executive session. And then Tuesday, April 20th, we have our regular board meeting at 7:00 p.m. So if there's no further business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, aye? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.